Hey everyone, today we're going to take a look at a topic that a lot of people probably can't quite understand how we can break it into so many pieces parts. And that concept is representative democracy or a republic. We talk about what is a republic. In a representative democracy, there are a couple of different theories, three different theories exactly, that we look at to try to explain how we do things here in the United States. And they all apply, but they don't all apply at the same time. And those are participatory democracy, pluralist democracy, and elitist democracy. So we'll get to all three of these, but I want to start with participatory democracy because I think when somebody says democracy, what we immediately go to, if you think about the ancient Greece, concept of democracy, is where everybody's involved in the decision making. Well, we don't always have that right now. I mean, if you think about the way the Constitution is set up today, don't we elect representatives to go do it for us? Yes, we do. But what about at the local level or the state level? We don't always do that. And so a lot of times, especially at those levels, we have this idea of participatory democracy, which does not filter democracy really at all because the people are involved in these decisions. And the three types of participatory democracy are recall, referendum, and initiative. And I'm explaining each one of these with examples, but recall basically is if we have an elected official that is not up for re-election for a while and they're really screwing up or maybe do something illegal, there is a mechanism whereby you can recall them from office with a special election. I'll show you an example of a ballot on that one here in a second. Then there's referendum. And a referendum is easiest, I think, to remember if you use the term refer. So in a referendum, the elected officials will refer that decision to the people. So we actually get to vote on a referendum. And then the last one is initiative. And that's where the people themselves get the process started, usually through, you get, a petition together, looking to, get enough signatures on it to get something put on the ballot. So those three things, first would be a recall election. I think probably the most famous recall election that we've had recently was in California several years ago now. And Gray Davis was the governor, and the people of California were upset with him, so they had a recall election. And here's the ballot that they got to pick from. So first thing that they did is they went to the polling place. First question is, should Gray Davis be recalled or removed as governor? Yes or no? And if you pick yes, then they would ask, pick one of these candidates. And look how many candidates there were here for this. But I think if you talked about this in your history class, we know this was the election that Arnold Schwarzenegger won. So in 2003, Schwarzenegger becomes governor of California because Gray Davis was recalled. And there were all kinds of people from, other actors to entrepreneurs to, an adult film actress was on the ballot. So it got really bizarre in California. But this is one where Schwarzenegger became the governor of California. So that would be an example of a recall election. Then there is a referendum. And a referendum is usually when a local municipality, the best example I have for a referendum is like a school district. Like, should we raise property taxes to build, a new facility? Should we allow, something to happen in our city? Should we raise a tax to improve public works? Something to that effect. So if politicians don't really want to raise your taxes, a lot of times they'll put that as a referendum. You get to vote on it. Should we do this or should we not? And that's also participatory democracy because the people are making this decision. And then the third one is initiative. And a lot of times with initiatives, these are things that maybe the state legislatures really don't want to make a decision on. I know in Kansas several years ago, before the Obergefell case, they had on the ballot, should we allow gay marriage? And of course, Kansas voted that down. Here's an example I believe this one's from California, where they were asking, should we legalize marijuana or decriminalize marijuana? So they'll put that on the ballot, or the people got together and got enough signatures on a petition to get it on the ballot, and then the people voted whether or not to make that a law. So those are the ideas of the people participating directly in our democracy. But there are pros and cons to all of this stuff, guys. So with this first one, with participatory democracy, the question I think people want to ask is can there be too much letting people make the call as opposed to, elected representatives? Cute example here. Should the U.S. go to war against Russia? There are 4 seconds remaining in this poll. Yes, 101,000 to no, 78,000. that can get kind of dangerous. Do we trust the people? So what I have for you, I have a little mental exercise that I want you guys to do with me here. I've got 8 questions that I'm going to ask you. And so just sitting there watching this, just in your head, can you answer these 8 questions? Right? And this will be an example of what I'm talking about. So the first question that I want to ask you is, what is the name of Homer Simpson's son on The Simpsons? What is the name of his son? Okay. Question number 2. What is the name of one of Homer's epic poems about ancient Greece? Name one of those. Question 3. What planet is Superman from? What planet is Superman from? Question 4. What planet is closest to the sun? What planet in our solar system is closest to the sun? Got that? Question number 5. Name one of the 3 young heroes of House Gryffindor. One of the 3 heroes. Okay. Question 6, name one of the 3 branches of American government. And question 7, name one of Snow White's 7 dwarves. One of Snow White's 7 dwarves. Okay. And finally, question 8, name one member of the United States Supreme Court. So hopefully in your head you were able to answer all 8 of those questions, because what we're doing here is we're checking, your knowledge of basic things to see, are you qualified to make decisions? Do you have enough information? So this was actually put out to citizens of the United States. And here are the results. 60% of Americans knew Bart Simpson, but only 14% knew the Iliad, and only 6% knew the Odyssey, the epic poems by Homer, which, by the way, I had to read both of those in college. Hardest thing I've ever read in my life, but also one of the most rewarding. They're great stories. I recommend it, but man, it was hard. But only 14% knew the Iliad and 6% knew the Odyssey. 60% of Americans knew the fictional planet Krypton, but only 37% knew Mercury, planet in our solar system. 42% of Americans knew the 3 branches were the executive, legislative, and judicial. 87% of Americans could name a dwarf, but only 35% could name a Supreme Court justice. And of those Supreme Court justices, obviously, the one right now, most famous, she's in the news is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And you have Clarence Thomas was next, and Chief Justice John Roberts. But these numbers are extremely low. And these are the people that, are making decisions as to whether or not our Constitution is valid. Some of these issues that come up, are these laws legal? And nobody seems to know who they are. So, back in the day, there was the late night show on the Tonight Show. Jay Leno had this skit years ago. I wish they kind of still did it sometimes. It's called Jaywalking, and he would walk around L.A. and ask people basic questions about society and government, and it was basically made to make fun of people. Because it kind of pointed out how little we really know about America and about our system. But I guess if you look at it, it's like, well, why do I need to know off the top of my head those basic facts? Can't I just Google it, right? Or, why don't I just surround myself with smart people and I'll look smart by comparison, I guess. So that participatory democracy, the upside is we get a voice. The downside is, are we always educated enough to make decisions that are going to affect everybody else? So that's participatory. The second one that I want to talk about is called pluralism. Now, pluralism does filter democracy a bit. And what this basically means, the idea of pluralism, is joining groups, okay? It's because when we join our groups, it tends to magnify our voices. So instead of just one person, calling for something, you join a group, people of like mind, and then your voice becomes magnified. And so you do get your voice magnified. And what happens is, and the theory behind this is, these groups will then compete against one another. So no one group then becomes too powerful, because you have other groups that are competing with that. And we'll get more into that with Madison's idea on this here in a minute. So that's kind of how pluralism works. And, if you're talking about, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, can you imagine, if it's just 1 or 2 people expressing concern about these issues going on in the United States, you're not going to be heard. But when we join together in these groups, we do get our voice magnified, and hopefully, people will pay attention to the ills, or that at least we perceive, whether it be, more funding for education or, environmental causes. These groups then will compete and hopefully get good legislation. Another example of this, of pluralism, would be guns, right? We talk about the Second Amendment, that comes up a lot. And you have competing groups on this. You have a group called Everytown for Gun Safety, which is a group that would love to see, laws put in place to reduce crime, to reduce, murders, shootings, bring down the violence that guns tend to perpetuate in our society. Then you have the National Rifle Association, who looks at that as, well, they're infringing or infringing on our Second Amendment rights. So if you are one voice, then you're not going to be heard. So what happens is people will join these groups. People that tend to be more on the gun safety, gun control side, they can join Everytown for Gun Safety. There's my group. People that are pro-Second Amendment will join the NRA, and not just join these groups, but what they do is they will charge dues. So the money that you pay to join these groups will then go to that cause. And if it's just one person's money, again, you can kind of see where pluralism comes in. Not going to make that big a difference. But if you have everybody pooling their money for these causes, that really increases, I think, the effect that that's going to have. So whether you want to, ban assault weapons or protect the Second Amendment, you're going to have your voice. But the upside to this then is these two groups will compete. So one group's not going to get everything they want. We go back to this idea of compromise, where hopefully you get good legislation out of it that benefits both sides. And so that's the idea of pluralism. And what I had you guys do for today is I had you read an anti-federalist paper called Brutus Number 1. Now, Brutus 1 is making the case that pluralism is not necessarily the best idea, or that a large centralized republic is not a good way to run the country. The anti-federalists were afraid of big government. They were afraid of the big circle that were going to take away their rights. And Brutus was writing about this and basically pointed out that if you're going to have a representative democracy, New York is different than South Carolina. And Georgia is different from Pennsylvania. So if you have just one great big centralized country, those groups aren't going to be represented. It's going to be too big. So the states then need to be autonomous, because you would figure people that live in a state would be more closely linked together with things than people clear across the country. So that was their argument. What we're going to see is we're going to see Madison make a different argument. He's going to make this argument about pluralism and these groups. So if you are in a small country and you have these groups, as opposed to in a big country you had groups, one of the best movies I can think of to make this point is Mean Girls, right? And hopefully you guys still understand this movie. If you haven't seen Mean Girls, find it on Netflix. But basically you have this group of girls that become, mean girls. And they get their way all the time because they have, prestige or money or whatever. So the question would be, are they more dangerous in a small school or a big school? So if you have this group of mean girls in a very tiny school, they're going to have a whole lot more power and be able to enforce their will and get what they want if there's not enough competition. But in a big school, you're going to have different groups that they have to compete with. So Madison's argument, and he's going to make this in the next document that we're going to read, Federalist Number 10, makes the point that, pluralism is a way to keep a large, country functioning properly, because the more groups you have, the more they'll cancel each other out. So you want a lot of groups. He didn't necessarily like groups. He called them factions, and we'll talk about what factions are. But he felt if you're going to have them, have a bunch of them. That way they compete, and no one group's going to rise and take over everything. So we have these two competing theories then in Federalist Number 10, which we'll read later, and Brutus 1, which you guys read for this lecture. This idea that, these groups, they are selfish and they only want what they want. We call them the mischief of factions. But since there are many groups, they'll compete against one another. Brutus, on the other hand, was talking about we have to have a decentralized system because people aren't the same, and my voice isn't going to be heard, and it's going to be so big you can't govern. People's voices are not going to be heard. So those are the two arguments that we have with this. And so the downside, though, when you think about pluralism, it does filter democracy. But lately what we've seen, what happens when people just blindly follow the leadership? And we've had all kinds of issues with, people not paying attention. It's like, well, that's my group, so therefore I have to go along with whatever they say. We've seen many, many groups that do become corrupt, and you have leadership that get indicted for embezzling funds. And so there is that part of, human nature that is selfish, that wants power. Madison would argue that other groups then will prevent that from happening. But we have to be very careful when we look at these groups. does the mission change? Is the mission still what you thought it would be? And as long as we're on our toes and as long as we're vigilant about what it is important to us and the groups that we belong to, whether they be labor unions or political parties or whatever, and don't just follow blindly. Madison points out that this is a great system. So that's the second one, pluralism, that does filter democracy a little bit. The third one, and I think this one's probably the easiest to understand because we hear about this all the time on news, and that is elitism. And elitism basically really filters democracy because what they're saying is the people that are making the decisions in this country are the rich and the powerful. Like the average person doesn't really have a shot. Even if they join these groups and even if their voices are magnified, they can't match the money that's currently in politics right now and the quest for power. Whether it be Black Lives or even Second Amendment issues to a degree, the people with money are going to get their way every time, and that is an argument for elitism. And so the critics, if you think about it, even the Constitution itself when it was written, it was created by all white men. 37 of the 55 that were there, 37 were lawyers, 7 were former governors. You had plantation owners that owned slaves. These were the elite of society that created the document in the first place. So a critic would say they put the system in that's going to benefit the rich and powerful. And so they can make an argument that we do see some of that today. With this upcoming election, this is going to be a big issue. Have we gone too far to elitism, or are we still a participatory democracy because we all have these groups? Or is it more a pluralism where these groups compete? And you can make an argument for all three of these being, functioning in American society today. Sometimes we see more participatory, like with Black Lives Matter. Other times we see, elitism with, with these big corporations getting, pretty much anything they want. But they're all valid and they're all there. So those are the three that I want you to get. So we're going to take this information then and we're going to put it to the test and look at which way do you see it functioning. And then you guys are going to come up with examples after this. So just remember those three, the three issues: participatory, pluralistic, and elitism. And then when we come back next time, we'll put these three together and see kind of what we come up with. All right? Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.